Richard, and tell everybody how delighted you were to get someone to ask you to come and talk at no time notice at all. And we'll go from there.
Well, hello everyone. My name's Richard. I'm from Communities Prepared. Some of you recognise your faces already, and we've had conversations previously. Communities Prepared is a national community preparedness and resilience programme. It's funded by the National Lottery, and the aim behind it is to help communities become more prepared and better resilient towards a range of different hazards that they may face. So we're not here to sort of preach what you should do or what you shouldn't do. We recognise that each community is unique and you will face challenges in your own unique ways. But we're here to help and support you have better outcomes and engage with how you can, as I say, have better outcomes. So that originally we started off following the Somerset flooding and the Devon flooding in around 2015, around that period. We started off, I think, the end of 2016. So we're coming up, not this year, but next year to our 10th anniversary. And so we started off originally with flood volunteer training, and that was very much focused in those geographic areas. From there, we've sort of expanded during COVID, and we were doing pandemic volunteer and how to deal with and how volunteers and communities could get involved with that. And then we've continued to grow in the range of hazards, and geographically around England, we cover the entirety. And then we also help and support into Wales and Scotland as well. As I say, a range of different hazards, from flooding to heat waves to wildfire, storms, and we also provide support around community emergency volunteer coordination, emergency planning, risk assessment, and other skills around that as well. So that's a very brief whistle-stop tour about what we do. But I think here today, I think what we're going to do, because it was pretty short notice, and I think we're talking almost less than 24 hours now. So I also think it's better to not necessarily have a PowerPoint and do a set script. So I think what we're going to do today is do it as a conversation piece around the challenges and what's going on in the UK currently, and also what other countries do as well. Because in a lot of ways, the UK is a bit of an outlier compared to other nations. Other nations far more are community focused in their response and their resilience aspects. So I'm happy to talk about that as well. And then we can move into sort of like some troubleshooting Q&A. So where your pain is, where your challenges are in your community, and what you want to achieve, and what might be some of the challenges you face, or some of the blockers that you're coming up against, and seeing if we can navigate some of that as well. So that's the plan up to now. Is that okay, Graham?
Absolutely. And my first question, which hopefully will start the ball rolling, is to say, how much pushing do you have to do to persuade people they do need to make preparations?
Depends who you mean by people.
Well, councils, I guess.
Councils, it varies. It varies. I think there are some councils, parish and town councils, that are very proactive. And I think historically they used to have emergency plans in place. I think what happened was during COVID, a lot of almost the emergency plans were put on the back burner, and they moved to a response plan. And it was creating something in the moment to deal with something that hadn't been covered fully in the emergency planning beforehand. Then since then, there's been a lot of churn and change, and also for people who were involved in that response, a lot of fatigue as well. And so some places have taken that as a chance to renew and revisit old work that they had, and the old emergency plans and old thinking, and to revamp that and revise that and move forwards. Others are coming in quite fresh to it and recognizing that then they're possibly needing to reinvent the wheel, if that makes sense, because they did have emergency plans, but they are so old, so antiquated, and have been lost in the sort of the change of people who've been involved in it as councillors.
Right.
On other approaches, we've got other community, other parish and town councils where they're adamantly or vehemently against doing anything, and they strongly feel that they haven't got a role to play in this. There is no statutory obligation to do it. This is the role of your local authority, and this is the role of the emergency services, which is a viewpoint. The challenge is what is currently happening in the UK, as we've seen with such things as the ambulance crisis, and the challenges around getting ambulances to even urban communities. And what I would say is there have been lots of instances during storms where it has taken in excess of 72 hours for the emergency services to be able to reach some remote communities. We've had the luxury in the UK of having a very strong and resilient emergency service for decades. We haven't had huge amounts of emergencies within local areas. What they've often been is a train crash or a plane crash or something, a spectacular accident or incident in that way. But what we've been getting since 2000, I would say, is an increasing challenge around flooding. And it's been the floods which are the driver behind a lot of the emergency recognition within locales. That said, we had wildfires. The biggest ones, or the biggest start to them, were again in around 2015, and that was the fires above Manchester in the moorlands. And we started to worry then and ask the question, because it was getting quite close to the urban area. But then everybody forgot about it until you saw smoke on the horizon around London, and they got the helicopters up, and all of a sudden there was a lot more interest. So I would say we're about 15 to 20 years behind flooding with wildfires, but there's a big recognition now, certainly around the rural-urban interface, with the significant risk of wildfires that exist and is growing. This year they're expecting, the Met Office long-term weather forecast is expecting to be twice the chance of a heat wave than an average year. So we're expecting a very hot summer, a very dry summer, a very wildfire high risk summer as well. I've sort of gone off on a tangent there. Sorry.
Well, I think there is a degree of complacency here that we're all very used to having the internet available, your Wi-Fi available, your phones available, your food stores available, and then all panic lets loose when suddenly you discover they're not there. And I would have thought that was quite a potent message to get to people, that you can actually plan for going for, say, I don't know, 3 or 4 days without food supplies and without water, without electricity, without it becoming an absolute disaster. But those very simple steps seem to be very hard for people to convince themselves to actually take.
I think that again comes from the fact that the UK has been quite privileged. I was going to say, I know people are typing in the chat. If somebody wants to read those, if there's any for me with that comes through, because I'm dyslexic, so when I struggle to monitor that and to sort of manage the conversation. But there is the UK's been quite privileged. But even so, recently, America has moved to a mindset where it says you need to be able to provide and support yourself for up to 72 hours without any external aid. Australia has recently moved from 3 days to 7 days, but it advises 14 days.
Woo.
You need, as individuals and communities, to be able to help and support yourself. If you look around Europe as well, those conversations are being had. So Finland, Norway, Sweden are all having very frank conversations that are saying, if there's no power, how are you going to be able to go to the shops? How are you going to be able to buy food? How are you going to be able to cook it? How are you going to be able to store it? And it's having those frank conversations. The problem is in the UK governments seem to, regardless of their colour, be unable or unwilling to have that frank conversation with the population. And I can say that having had conversations at a national level around that. The fear is the political damage that having a frank conversation with the electorate would have. So they're leaving it to organisations such as ourselves and others, and they're sort of, we're having to sort of go out and almost be seen as scaremongering, but we aren't scaremongering. We're having the conversations that are being had in other countries.
I find it amazing that the vast majority of people seem to be very happy if there's a leader that comes up and tells them what is going on, rather than being terrified of telling them what's going on in case they get scared. I mean, we're all worried about what's going to happen regardless of what the government is saying. So it does seem to me that the onus is really upon each community to make arrangements to take care of itself, because you never know, as you say, until you're local, which floods are going to affect you in which direction, or the wildfires, or the loss of power. But it does seem to make an awful lot of sense, and I hope that people will be looking at your website to take home some fundamental ideas of what they can be doing in their local community.
Yeah, and thank you, Greg. I was going to say, if you want to come to the website, there's lots of information that's available if you become a member, and membership is free of charge. It's just a method of justifying our funding from the National Lottery. So we can say we've got so many members, our membership has gone up. This is helping to justify our funding. But you can also sign up, and I would strongly recommend doing the Zoom training sessions that we offer. And they are on, as I say, a multitude of different topics. And by all means, reach out to us. We can we can add more topics. We are a small team, so there is a bit of a time lag with things. But we're launching the power outage, which is, we used to have a utility failure module which covered everything. What we've now done is broken that out. So we're creating a suite of modules. The power outage is going to be piloted tomorrow night. We've got a water and sewerage outage that will be the next one to follow on. Then we're looking at a comms failure and focusing specifically on communication failure. And we're also developing another module, which will be one that talks about a sort of a poly emergency. So it's when you have multiple emergencies and they're intertwined. So for example, if you have power outage and water outage and comms outage, and you're getting those combinations that are going on. But if we talk about the concept of it as that poly outage, is that poly emergency where you've got the multiple emergencies taking place, that could be a whole series of different things. But
just keeping an eye on the comments for you. And
thank you.
Christine has got a comment that Kinver had a problem during the last storm: trees down, no electric, no mobile phone. So Christine, could you expand a little on that for us? Because how ready was your community for that sort of outage?
Sorry, I just need to unmute myself. Yeah, when the storm, I think it was Storm Dara that caused all the problems, Kimver, I don't know if people know Kimver, but it's got an edge and is quite a wooded area. Kimver itself is in a basin, and We couldn't. Well, somebody did get through to district, but there wasn't anybody actually in charge that was anything to do with the strategic plan and had no idea what to do. And it was just absolute chaos. As I say in my note, the phones were down, the electric was down. We've got caravan park right in the centre of Kimver, and there were some people in the caravans that rely on equipment, breathing equipment and stuff. So we were really worried about them. But of course, we didn't know who else there was in the community that would need help. And how do we get power to them? Who's got a generator and things like that? And because the phones were down, nobody could talk to anybody else as we normally would do through mobile phones, phone them up and sort it out. So there were a few people, a few of the councillors actually, that got together and sort of did a run around to do what they could, especially for the one that they knew had got essential equipment in their caravan to keep them alive. And it was a problem that was really raised and has raised its head now at district. And of course, BT, as they're doing at the moment, are getting rid of all the telephone boxes. And we've got one in the centre of the village, which they were wanting to get rid of. And particularly because of that event, it showed that we need the telephone box still, because the BT lines were still up and running. And the only way you could phone anybody was by going to the BT box. And it was used a few times actually during those 2 days. So it showed that it was essential. And thankfully, they've decided to keep our British telephone box in the village.
Well, just oh, sorry,
Yeah, go on.
just
No,
on
it was
the
just a difficult time, and it really showed how delicate things are, and if things aren't in place. I mean, 12 years ago when I joined the parish council, one of my first questions was, have we got a strategic plan? And the answer was, oh, district deal with that. You don't need to worry about it.
what I was going to say is just touching on the phone situation to start with. Currently, all the old copper lines, the landlines, are being
Yeah,
replaced by fibre optic.
yeah, being ripped
So,
out.
yeah, so every phone line will need power in order to
Mm,
work.
yeah,
So when we lose power, we lose comms. There is a requirement that your phone providers should be able to provide a battery backup system if there is an essential need for communication during a power outage. But what they're relying on is that everybody has a mobile phone, and they're relying on the mobile phone networks
yeah.
having a battery that lasts for a decent length of time, and that the mobile phone network doesn't fall over. I think we were all more realistic on this call than that optimism. But as I say, there are opportunities. You can request a resilient phone, is what it's called, and what it has is a battery backup, and that is for people who, as I say, who need a communication for some reason, whether that's medical or so on, and also where mobile phone signal is not reliable. So that's something to consider. Other things, you mentioned around that you're sort of having that hybrid or that multiple emergency when you had the storm hit. You got damage from the storm, you got loss of power, loss of comms, and so on. What I would say to you is one thing that is really, really useful to create. Well, there's several things here. One is a hub and spoke structure within your community. So within the parish council, you look at the central hub or the resilience hub or the emergency response hub for your community, but then look to have spokes within the wider community itself. And they are your groups. They are local key locations, whether that is a local pub that might be an outlier in further out in the community, and so on. Those hubs are really essential for getting the comms around out there and the messaging out there. Other things to be aware of is to create a local asset register. So a register of both people and equipment and potentially locations that are willing and happy to be supported during an emergency. There is what we would look at as there's 3 tiers of volunteers. There's the traditional volunteer who is trained and is a member of an organisation and is a known quantity and has had training and is part of a coordinated pre-planned response. On the other side of that, you've got your spontaneous volunteers that come out of the woodwork at a moment's notice. Something's happening, crisis is happening, what do you need done? They're really useful, but the problem is the challenge is about them being an unknown quantity. And so you don't know what training they've had, you don't know what they can do, you don't know what you should be asking them to do. Because if you ask somebody to do something, you take on the liability for that. So what we've suggested is there's a third group, and this third group is your retained volunteers. They're people who are skill rich and might be resource rich and capacity rich, but are often time poor. They don't want to be part of an organisation where they are endlessly turning up to meetings or being asked, to comment on a weekly or monthly basis. But they are members of a community that might be your doctors, your nurses, your tree surgeons, your plant and machinery operators. These people, your tree surgeons, as I say as well, that are key members and have key skills, and you can call upon and access in an emergency for a specific task. And you see them as the expert in that process. So you're effectively commissioning their professionalism during the emergency, and they are making a judgment call what they do, if they can respond to it or if they can't. So it's falling on them to say no or yes, rather than you tasking them to go and chainsaw a tree. You're saying, there's some trees down over here. These are the people who are tree surgeons. Send them a message and go, there's trees down over here. Can you organise? Is there any chance you can organise? Can you have a look at them? It's their choice then, what they do about that.
I must say we do have a really good community, not only just in the few houses around here where I live, which is slightly out of Kimber Village. But during that storm, we had a tree come down just round the corner from me, and somebody called it into district, and a word went out on the WhatsApp group, and within 20 minutes, the tree had been dismantled. It had cleared the road. The bus could carry on going round the road.
And somebody's over the moon with a car full of logs.
Yes, yes, some of them are in my garden.
So you were the culprit. So we could see with that one incident, there's so many things that we can learn and how we can use. The other part is the importance of the human community knowledge. We talk about having a vulnerable register, and different local authorities will say different things. Some local authorities want you to give them their information and feed all this, vulnerable resident and vulnerable location information in. Others will be, don't do it, don't keep it, we don't want to know anything.
Well, we were told by district we can't have one. We're not allowed to hold one. The GDPR rubbish. You know, we're not allowed to have people's details.
You can if they agree to it. GDPR is a method to keep people's data safe and to allow you to share it. It's not there as a mechanism to prevent it. So you would need to let people know what the data is you're going to be storing, why you're going to store it, and how you're going to do it and keep it protected. And that's ring fenced. And people have the choice whether that data is passed to you or not. That's that part. But the other part is, if you believe somebody is in potential harm, GDPR specifically says you can share that. If you have a belief that that person needs help, you can share it. And so it's as simple as that. But what I would say to you is actually keeping records and databases, it isn't a living entity. It isn't it's something that's almost out of date as soon as it's created. So actually, it's the community network and the community not shared living knowledge that exists that is essential. And then that needs to be pooled and acted upon at the time of need. Because we're going to get people who, vulnerable people that age is one thing. So we're looking at people over 65 and we're looking at the age, well, they aren't going to get any younger, so they're going to stay in that list for a period of time. But you have transient vulnerabilities as well. So people recovering from surgery, people who are pregnant, people with young children, people who are just moving into the area and don't know what's going on, people who might be who are on welfare support because they've lost their job. Hopefully they're going to get another one, but there's lots of data there or information that is going to change very, very rapidly. And there's no, with the best will in the world, we can't keep on top of that. And so the best way is to have a network that is able to pull that information together at a moment's notice and to identify who is struggling and what is their need. So you're looking at doing door knocks and welfare checks and needs assessments, and then pooling that information rapidly. Graham, you've got your hand up. You're on mute.
I just wanted to point out, first of all, that people are making contributions in the chat.
Right.
There's one just come in from Linda that suggests there's a wonderful book about how US communities responded to Hurricane Sandy and all the sorts of lessons that we could learn from there. So I just point that to people. By the way, for those of you who are not familiar with these sessions, we do record everything and then make it available to everyone afterwards. So everything that's in the chat, all the comments that were being made, would all be available to everyone after this if they needed. The second thing, Gary, was to give you a segue into your No 21 project, and thought perhaps you could talk to us about that, please.
Yep. So if I go with the first one first, I think some of the really good knowledge to take away from America is the CERT teams, the community emergency response teams. Now, a couple of local authorities or LRFs within the UK have jumped on that bandwagon and have taken the name CERT and have applied it to volunteers within their community. And that's not really the case. They aren't really CERT teams. CERT teams in America are community groups that have been trained and are prepared to quite a high standard, including urban search and rescue. But they've been trained by sending a community member to FEMA, who has then been trained, comes back and comes train the trainer into their community. And they are registered and they are expected to act at a certain way. But that's something that may come into the UK at that level. The other one is what's happening in New Zealand and Australia, and that's very much more the collective adhocracy of a community that comes together, and it's recognizing and they put things up as simply a need and an offer board, and it's simply a whiteboard, and people just stick on what they need, and somebody else writes what they can offer, and they try to match those up. That can be a massive, massive help, and so on. So, segueing away into the No 21, this isn't an official sort of program at the moment, but it's something that I'm working on. It's the concept of knowing 21 people within your ability to reach them. So what I mean by that is walking distance. So if you know 21 people that you can get to, if you've got no power, no comms, and no anything, you know, the situation is dire. If you can reach 21 people and they can reach 21 people, within 3 links, typically you've found somebody who is a trauma doctor and 2 people who are a nurse within your network, and you've got a lot of other skills within that network. But if you can imagine that within your community, that you are pushing, you know, you're effectively taking the virtual social media and turning it back on its head, back to what it used to be, which was knowing your neighbours. And by knowing the people around you, what their skills are and what their vulnerabilities are, because everybody has a vulnerability. It might have been, Jack, I'm going to pick on you for a moment, but you're looking, as if you haven't got many vulnerabilities, but everybody does. It could have been Jack went out on a Friday night, it's Saturday morning and there's a flood, and he had a bit too many on Friday night and isn't 100% with it. And so it could be as something as transient as that, but it's about knowing people and knowing them as individuals and knowing what their strengths and weaknesses are. And how we then, as that 21 person group, knows 21 more people, and we can reach out within that to help and support each other. And ultimately, we're looking at what happens, what is the lowest form of, or the lowest level of coordination that can happen. And so you're really looking at street level or hamlet level, then into your parish and town councils, and those are the blocks that actually where people live. So we're looking at, think about all the people that exist and provide those services in a wider community. You're looking at members of the police, members of the fire and rescue service, ambulance service, your local doctor, your local GP. They live in your community. Think of them as 2 levels. Think of them as, yes, they've got those professional skills, but they're a member of your community as well. And that's where, if those systems, those wider systems, start to struggle and aren't able to continue for whatever reason, you can bring those community members and have a system or a mechanism in place that will allow those people with those skill sets to be activated and utilised in an emergency. Yeah. So that's where the No 21s it comes from. It's basically knowing 21 people that you can get to and ask for help or offer help and support to, and then scaling that up. Okay.
I think the other thing that we discussed yesterday was assuming that there is a complete comms breakdown, then how are people going to get together and where are they going to get together? You need an agreed space beforehand so that everyone knows that within 6 hours of an emergency taking place, then the village hall has become manned and is a focal point for information and help or whatever.
Yes, I would just sort of answer one question. Yes, under the Civil Contingencies Act, the parish and town councils do not have a duty at the present, and that is the situation. So I do want to make that clear. However, if we have some of the challenges and these sort of multiple complex challenges over wide, vast swathes of the UK, you will become essential in ensuring that your community has some cohesion, because we're already looking at the emergency services are looking to do the most good for the most people. So that will be closer to their bases, and it'll be closer to the hospital. It'll be so they don't need to travel far, and it'll be those larger urban areas where there is a lot more population, and that's where they will start their focus from. So we need to consider how we can operate in the absence of potentially external support for a period of time. Going on to your question, so the idea is that imagine your comms failed within your community, imagine your power was out, and that sort of scenario. When you're doing your planning, plan to have fail safes in place, so you fail in a safe mechanism. So if you, in the absence of a phone call or a WhatsApp message or a knock on the door, where will there be a meeting point? And again, if you come back to that spoken hub sort of approach, you end up with a community. It's like where I live. I live in a hamlet where there's 8 houses. Well, what would happen is it would probably be me that goes, knocks on the doors, checks on people, sees what's going on, and I become that node for the hamlet. And if then I knew where to go, I would then go to the parish council meeting point. And so then I could feed that information in that I've gathered into the parish and town council, and then can get help and support from that. But I would certainly say, remember your community. You're there to serve and support the community. Try not to do everything yourselves. Try to recognize the skill and the empowerment within your community already, within the parish or the town. And you want to help and support your local groups be drawn in and consider what they can do during an emergency, and think of it in that way. Whether that is a designated community emergency volunteer group or a resilience group, or whether it's something like the local Women's Institute or the Bowls Club or whatever it is. It might be the Young Farmers Association within the parish. What can they do? And challenge them to say, you know, if something goes wrong, what could you do to help? What plans could you put in place as a group of people with skills, with resource, that could come and help? And then you as a parish council look towards the coordination of those assets within your community.
Yeah, that's really good. There's a pertinent question in the chat, Richard, from Eamon that says, is there a list of skills that would be potentially helpful, and whether any skills require more than one in a group of 21?
What I would say to you is, when it comes to the No 21, don't think about trying to find a doctor, a tree surgeon, or something like that. The whole point is to just interconnect with 21 people and find out what skills they have and what support needs they might also have as well. The idea is that 21 people then go out and know 21 people more. And so it's about those connections, maybe into two to three levels, that get you the tree surgeon, rather than knowing a tree surgeon within the 21 people. When it comes to your local asset register, again, it isn't about determining a list of skills and resources you want within your community. It's recognizing what already exists, and it's mapping that. And then you might end up with, you know, it might be a rural one. You might have 10 tree surgeons, or you might live in an urban area and you've got 15 project managers. It's whatever is in your community, and then recognizing that. And so then as a community, you have your strengths, you have your abilities that you can do, and then you have neighboring communities. So what we want to do is to have you within your local hub and spoke methodology, but then you're connected to other parishes and you're connected to the local authority. And so you end up with this interconnected network that is able to self-heal during an emergency that can help and support each other. So if you haven't got those skills in your community, another community may well have. So you end up with this constant offer and need at a street level, at a parish level, at your district level, and interdependency. So you end up with this network of communication going on, and it's that becomes the sort of the panacea to the problem. It becomes the solution because you're actually talking and have a method of saying what you need to others, and then they can help and support you.
Great. I've got a piece of information for people which they may not be aware of, which is that within the army side of the cadet force at your local schools, there is a signals branch, and they will have or they may well have a radio system that is capable of talking to all the schools across the country. So you do have yet another means of communication available should all sorts of like the mobile phone system go down. And provided you've got some batteries around that can keep the radio systems going, then you've got a means of communicating with the world. And I just mentioned that in passing in case people hadn't thought of the radio.
Well, worst case, you could always rig up a dynamo from the hamsters in the science lab. Sorry, it's an awful comment, but it was just a comical one. But
Yeah.
there are mechanisms you'd be able to deal with that. What I would also say is you've got ham radio, enthusiasts within the local community. There are organisations such as RayNet, but RayNet during a widespread outage would be drawn in to deal with the LRF level and setting up hubs within an LRF in order to get comms around the wider area. I'm very much aware that is the plan in a lot of locales, that the voluntary organisations will be drawn in to that larger response. So that's where I'm saying, yes, we, during peacetime, so to speak to them, get them involved, help you, but be aware if that's a local or a local area event, they will be able to help and support and look to set up, emergency mobile masts or so on to help get communication going, or Wi-Fi or whatever. But if it's a larger scale event, that won't be coming because it will be being used by others.
So bearing in mind, Richard, that a lot of people like to have a document to refer to, does your website support a list of all these ideas somewhere so people can say, here's a check-off list, let's go through it and see which applies to our particular geography and community?
Yes and no. Not to the degree of what I'm talking about now, is what I will simply say. We have got an emergency planning workshop, and the idea of that is there is a workbook that goes alongside it, and we were involved with developing the London Resilience Toolkit, which is sort of a step-by-step process for developing an emergency plan in effect. But we've got some more practical versions of that as well. And so if you went on the emergency planning workshop, it's a 2 sessions piece, and that would help you either revisit one you've already got or to start a new one moving forwards. We do have a risk assessment or a risk management sort of session as well. And there are other elements that we offer as well. And there is a government template. What I would say to you is, there are lots of templates out there that your local authorities quite often will come up with one for themselves, or an LRF will come up with one for themselves. I've seen some which are really simple and really straightforward. Others you would struggle, if you were in charge of the British Armed Forces, to enact and fill out as an emergency plan. They are so complicated. And you need to have a team of professionals in order to do it. What I would say to you is, any plan is better than no plan. The plan is as good as it is to be used. You need to not have it on a shelf. You need to share it with the community so the community can see it. It is the community's emergency plan, not the parish and town council's emergency plan. It should be owned, and it needs to be a living document that the community understand and then are more likely to interact with and offer to help and support with. Put it up there as a straw dog, not man sort of thing, so that the community can say, hang on, this isn't going to work because of X, Y, and Z, or there's a better plan here, and we can make it better. So please don't be afraid to share your community's emergency plan, and share it with those statutory responding organisations. So share it with the local authority, share it with the fire and rescue service. If you have flood volunteers within your community, let the fire and rescue service know that you have them and what skills they have, what level they're expecting to do. So it might be that you've decided that you want to have pumping operations because that is appropriate for your locale. Well, the fire and rescue service need to know that. All these things are helping and supporting. But as I say, it needs to be a living document. It can't sit on a shelf. It should be reviewed periodically. I would say it should be reviewed, worst case, annually. It should be reviewed if there's an incident. It should be reviewed when there has been a training for it. And you want to have desk-based training, a desk-based exercise within your community, but also exercise elements of it in the real world, so that your community can see things happening. So run a rehearsal as if there was a flood or there was a wildfire, access roads being cut off. Yes, I'm not saying necessarily block a road, but you simulate that. Yeah. You can bring in the emergency services, and the emergency services would quite often be very supportive of coming to a community and rehearsing, because they get to see it in a community. They get to do what they do in a community, but it allows that partnership working, and it reassures both parties in what can happen and so on. And they'll help and support in that way. Are there any other questions or any other problems people are having, or anything that people have thought of that they would like to bring up or ask? Yeah.
Hi.
For Jonathan.
Yeah, this is fascinating. Thank you so much. I guess I love the idea of the Node 21, and yet some of the people I live with are quite some climate deniers, some people quite skeptical about things. I don't know them particularly well. I guess it's just a question of if you've got any advice for how to kind of engage your neighbours in a topic which you feel like they might not want to engage in.
Well, actually, don't necessarily start with that topic. And you've got the great ins at the moment. So at the moment, look at what's happening in Ukraine. Look at the conversation around the war footing that the UK is moving on to. That is a brilliant opener in somebody who's a climate, who doesn't believe in climate change, because it's got nothing to do with the climate. but it still touches on resilience, it still touches on preparedness, it still touches on that emergency aspect. But also, the idea of a concept of No 21 isn't just about knowing what they can do and what you can do and having a conversation about the challenges. It's about understanding your neighbour, understanding the person who lives next to you or down the road, and having some human contact. So it's also feeding into reducing the sense of isolation and the challenges around mental health as well. So there's so much around that. And it isn't solely around the mercenary approach of what to do if something goes wrong, but specifically around when you have a difference of a view. I would put it in that in more generic terms. Look for similarities. Start the conversations and see where you can actually find common ground. Then you have an open conversation, which in this day and age can be quite challenging. And I try to have an open conversation where you discuss what those differences are and why those differences exist, but don't challenge the person, challenge their thinking on that topic, if that makes sense, but don't make them feel threatened. There's some really great work about dealing with people who may have gone down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theory and things like that. There's a lot of work that's been done around that. And it comes from having open conversations and gently asking them, why do they think that? And then exploring their thinking. And then you don't pick holes, but you point out, well, why is that right? And so you actually get them to challenge their own thinking.
Great. Thank you.
I also thought, Jonathan, that a couple of other things that you might use on the deniers is that leave it to nature. So let's not talk about floods caused by the climate change, just the fact that there are floods. I was reading this morning about the chances of what they call a CME, a corona mass ejection, where there's basically a huge solar flare which could knock out all of our satellites, and so you lose comms. So that's nothing to do with climate denial. It's just a fact of life that every now and again the sun goes berserk. Or, we had that occasion a couple of years ago when a volcano took off in Iceland and had to reroute all the airplanes around the Atlantic and things like that. Didn't actually affect communications, but that sort of thing, I think, could have a major impact. And then, of course, there's always the next pandemic. That I think one of the things I was reading about COVID-19 was that the experts were rather surprised that there was so long between the last big episode, which was the Spanish flu at the end of 1918, and now it's 2020 before we had the next one. And they were amazed that we went for 100 years, and there's no reason to suspect that the next one won't come in 5 years' time or next week or whatever.
Well, just sort of expanding on that a little bit more. COVID-19 was not what we were expecting. And there are multiple others that we're still expecting the flu pandemic. And that will be far more challenging potentially than COVID. And there are other pandemics and so on around the world that other not pandemics, other diseases and other viruses that we're more concerned about that are on the potential radar that we watch out for. The other one I just wanted to sort of mention, I'm glad you clarified what you meant by leave it to nature. I was a little worried when you started that as the opener for it, of where that conversation was going. But mentioning the sort of a solar flare effect, we would be looking potentially in worst case scenarios like a Carrington event. And if that's happened, we're losing comms, we're losing power, you're losing transportation, you're losing so much electrical capability and electronic capability you've got to think how you would function without any of that. Now, a lot of it, the expectation is refers to a black start event. And a black start event is when the power network goes, the whole grid goes down. And that's what was referred to with Portugal. When Portugal had their sort of, Spain and Portugal had their power outage, and that's where their fear was it would take 7 days to reboot the whole network. That happens quite often. There's been quite a few of those that have gone on since 2000. We haven't had one yet. We've been close on a few occasions, but the point is that that would be a 7-day outage. Now, what they're looking at is rural areas would actually be up and running sooner than urban areas because their network is a lot more simplistic. So rural communities would get their supply back before urban areas, which have got a lot more complex power transmission networks. And so they would be out for potentially a longer period than 7 days. But if you're looking at a large-scale counting event, you're looking at personal electronic devices and items around the house would take a lot longer to replace and to operate, including cars, potentially, than having power back to properties. So lots of food for thought there.
Yes. I did tell people that this would be a reassuring session, Richard.
Okay, well, moving on from that then, the point of you're all here. And so that the reassurance is you're here, you're listening. If you are listening and you do nothing else, you're more prepared today than you were yesterday. And it's about the mindset of being prepared. Because if the actual emergency plan, the importance is about the process you go through to create it. During an emergency, you're often going to find that the plan falls apart and you have to do something else anyway. But the point is you've thought about it. Even the act of thinking about it makes you better prepared. And within your community, it's about recognizing all those skills, all those resources and all those capabilities that you have in that community and how can you access them. So I would say, yes, there are some significant challenges. Yes, as a nation, we need to do far, far better than we are when it comes to resilience. Other countries, other communities are far better than we are at the moment. But we have the advantage of a population we have. We just need to start connecting. So go out and know 21 people. That's the start point of being a more resilient community and a more resilient society. And don't forget your businesses. Businesses are part of your community. They have a job to play to make your community more resilient, but you as a community have a job and a role to play to help and support them during an emergency as well. So yeah, hopefully that's put on a more optimistic spin on it towards the end.
Well, thank you very much, Jack. I really did appreciate that coming. A lot of very nice comments coming to your way from the chat. So if nobody else has got a hand up or is desperate to say anything, let me say thank you so much for stepping into the breach. We're very grateful to you. And thank you everyone for attending. And we look forward to seeing you next week. And having cast attention upon Jack during your speech, Richard, I should point out that Jack will be next week's Banter session provider, and he'll be updating us on what's going on with his world that he let us know about last year.
Yes.
So thank you all very much for your time. Sorry, Jack, is spitting.
I'll just mention, yeah, thank you so much for that, Richard. Yeah, I've got a project called Postcode Revolution, which is put in the chat, which is very resonant with this. Is about kind of building community, connecting with neighbours around that hyperlocal level and doing stuff. So yeah, that was fantastic to listen to. And as listening to that, I'm going to slightly adapt what I'm going to talk about next week, because a lot of it was is stuff that I'm doing. So I'll be focusing more around nature and nature-based kind of adaptation and transformation next week in the context of that. But yeah, so useful and so interesting. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Great, Jack. Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming, and see you next time, whenever that happens to be.
Yeah. And I love the idea that Chris Noon's photobombing cat reminds us that emergencies can happen at any time. Well done.
And I'm surprised it didn't.
A question mark of the tail as it walked past.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
No, Andrew, you're missing your opportunity here.
I am. Let us go forward together. We'll never surrender.
Jack, if you want to reach out to me, it would be really appreciated. We might be able to sort of connect with some of the like as you say, the postcode one you were mentioned. We might be able to build that in to some of the work we do, and so we can get the message out a bit wider for you. But yeah, so I'll put my if Graham, if you can pass my email address around, that'd be appreciated.
Happy to do that. I'll make sure it goes up on the wiki.
Cool.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you
you
very
guys.
much.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.